This might be the clearest Bigfoot footage anyone's ever captured on camera, and the story behind how it surfaced is going to keep you up at night. I'm talking about a 10-second trail camera clip that shows a Bigfoot standing in thick Michigan forest, staring directly into the lens like it knows exactly what it's looking at. Then it just steps away into the shadows. No sudden movements, no panic, just calm and deliberate, like it's done this 1,000 times before. What makes this different from every other supposed Bigfoot sighting is the quality. We're not talking about a blurry blob filmed from half a mile away on someone's ancient camcorder. This is modern trail camera footage with decent resolution, and you can actually see details. The proportions, the way it moves, the expression on its face before it turns away. Everything about this footage feels wrong in a way that makes your skin crawl because it looks too real to dismiss but too impossible to accept. The person who posted it claims to own remote property somewhere in the Michigan wilderness. No town name, no specific location, just Michigan area. And a desperate plea for advice on what to do next. I tried reaching out through Reddit's messaging system multiple times, no response, radio silence. Either this person got scared and deleted their account, or something happened that prevented them from replying. Both possibilities are equally unsettling when you see what their camera caught on May 18th, 2025. Before we get into the footage itself, I need to explain why Michigan is significant. The state has one of the highest numbers of reported Bigfoot encounters in the entire country. We're talking hundreds of documented sightings going back over a century, concentrated particularly in the Upper Peninsula and the dense forests of the northern Lower Peninsula. The Seney National Wildlife Refuge, Ottawa National Forest, Hiawatha National Forest. These are vast stretches of wilderness where you can hike for days without seeing another human being. If Bigfoot populations exist anywhere in the eastern United States, Michigan's remote forests would be the perfect habitat. People who live in these rural areas don't talk openly about Bigfoot encounters. There's too much stigma attached, too much risk of being labeled crazy or attention-seeking. But when you spend time in these communities, when you actually sit down and listen without judgment, you start hearing stories. The hunter who found massive footprints near his deer blind and never went back to that spot. The woman whose dogs refused to go past a certain point on her evening walks, hackles raised and whimpering. The truck driver who saw something impossibly large cross the highway at 3 a.m, moving on 2 legs with a stride that covered the entire road in 3 steps. These aren't people looking for attention. Most of them never reported what they saw to any official organization. They just quietly changed their routines, avoided certain areas, and carried the memory of their encounter like a secret burden. That's what makes this Reddit post so unusual. Someone finally got concrete evidence and immediately wanted to share it, wanted validation or explanation or just someone to tell them they weren't losing their minds. Instead, they got thousands of views, hundreds of comments ranging from genuine analysis to cruel mockery, and then disappeared from the platform entirely. Let me describe exactly what you see in these 10 seconds. The trail camera is mounted on a tree, angled slightly downward to capture whatever passes through a game trail. You can tell from the field of view that this camera was positioned to photograph deer, maybe black bears passing through. The timestamp burned into the corner reads May 18th, 2025, early afternoon based on the lighting. Sun is filtering through the canopy, creating that dappled pattern you get in thick forest. There's a massive, dark figure partially obscured by vegetation in the middle distance. At first, your brain tries to rationalize it as a tree stump or a shadow or some trick of light and leaves, but trees don't have that shape. Shadows don't move. This is something living, something substantial, standing among the ferns and saplings that make up the forest understory. The Bigfoot is positioned maybe 30 feet from the camera, slightly to the right of center frame. dense foliage fills the foreground, out of focus, green blur that actually helps establish depth and makes the figure stand out more. What immediately strikes you is the color and texture. This Bigfoot has dark brown or black fur, almost charcoal in the shadows, with lighter brown tones where sunlight hits it. The fur looks dense and shaggy, hanging in matted clumps like it's been living rough in the wilderness for its entire existence. You can make out the musculature underneath too, the way the fur moves over what must be incredibly powerful shoulders and chest. This isn't some person in a gorilla suit. The proportions are all wrong for human anatomy. The face is what gets me every time I watch this clip. Even through the intervening vegetation, even with the slight graininess that comes with trail camera footage, you can see the face clearly enough to make out features. It's looking directly at the camera, not past it, not vaguely in that direction, but straight into the lens like it's aware of being recorded. The eyes are dark and deep set under a prominent brow ridge. The nose is broad and flat. The overall facial structure is somewhere between ape and human, but not quite either. It's its own thing, its own species. And seeing that face staring back through a camera lens triggers something primal in your brain that recognizes you're looking at another intelligent being. The Bigfoot's expression is calm. That's what unsettles people most when they see this footage. There's no aggression, no fear, no surprise at finding a trail camera on its territory. Just calm assessment. It's studying the camera the way a wildlife biologist might study an interesting insect specimen. Curious but not concerned. The way its head is tilted slightly, the way its eyes seem to track across the camera housing. You get the impression this Bigfoot has seen trail cameras before. Maybe it's even destroyed a few, but this time it's choosing to simply acknowledge the device and move on. Around second 4 or 5, the Bigfoot begins to move. Not quickly, not with any sense of urgency. It just decides it's done examining the camera and starts to leave. You can see the shoulders shift as it begins to turn away from the lens. The movement is fluid and natural, nothing jerky or mechanical like you'd expect from someone in a costume trying to navigate rough forest floor. This is a creature completely at ease in its environment, moving through dense undergrowth like water flowing downhill. As the Bigfoot steps to the left, you get a better view of its full body. The torso is massive, barrel-chested in a way that makes grizzly bears look svelte by comparison. The arms are long, extending past where human arms would end, hanging in that characteristic ape-like proportion. But the legs are different from typical great apes. They're longer, more suited for bipedal locomotion. This Bigfoot doesn't knuckle walk like a gorilla. It stands fully upright and walks on 2 legs with a gait that's distinctly its own biomechanical signature. By second 8, the Bigfoot is moving behind a thick patch of vegetation. You can still see pieces of it through the leaves, the dark fur contrasting against green foliage and brown tree trunks. One more step and it's mostly obscured. Another step and you're just seeing hints of movement, the way branches shift as something large pushes past them. Then it's gone, melted back into the forest with the kind of stealth that seems impossible for something that must weigh 500 or 600 pounds minimum. The last 2 seconds of footage show only empty forest, leaves still swaying from where the Bigfoot passed through. I've watched this clip probably 200 times now, frame by frame, trying to find something that proves it's fake. I've looked for the telltale signs of a costume, unnatural proportions, visible seams, fabric texture instead of fur, movement that's too stiff or too human. I can't find any of that. The more I study it, the more convinced I become that we're looking at genuine footage of an unknown primate species that's managed to avoid scientific documentation for centuries. The way light plays across the fur, the subtle muscle movements visible beneath, the completely natural interaction with the environment, everything points toward this being a real animal. But here's what really bothers me about this footage. It's almost too perfect. The Bigfoot is positioned in frame like it knows where the camera's field of view begins and ends. It stays in that sweet spot of being clear enough to identify, but obscured enough by vegetation to maintain some ambiguity. It looks at the camera long enough to leave no doubt that it's aware of being filmed, then leaves at a leisurely pace rather than bolting away. This Bigfoot isn't just tolerating the camera, it's performing for it. And that level of intelligence, that understanding of human technology and how to interact with it, is frankly terrifying. The original Reddit post was brief, but packed with concerning details. The property owner explained they had inherited land from a grandparent who passed away a few years back. Several hundred acres of forest land in a remote part of Michigan, the kind of inheritance that sounds amazing, until you realize how much work goes into maintaining that much wilderness property. They said they'd set up a handful of trail cameras throughout the property, mostly to keep an eye on wildlife and make sure no one was trespassing or poaching. According to the post, they check the camera SD cards every few months, usually just finding typical Michigan wildlife. White-tailed deer, lots of them, occasional black bears, coyotes, foxes, the usual suspects. Sometimes hunters' vehicles on the access roads during appropriate seasons. Nothing particularly unusual until they pulled the cards in late May 2025 and found this Bigfoot footage sitting there between a photo of a doe and a video of a raccoon investigating the camera. What the property owner said next is what made my blood run cold. They mentioned that this particular camera had been experiencing problems for months. The SD card kept showing up empty when they knew it should have captured footage. Other cameras on the property worked fine, but this one specific camera would either have no recordings at all or just a handful when it should have captured hundreds of images. They assumed it was a technical malfunction, maybe a faulty motion sensor or a battery issue. They'd replaced batteries multiple times, even swapped out the entire camera unit twice. The problems persisted. Now they were wondering if something had been deliberately tampering with the camera. Bigfoot are reported in numerous accounts to have an understanding of trail cameras and other monitoring equipment. Some researchers believe Bigfoot actively avoid being photographed, which would explain why clear footage is so incredibly rare despite thousands of people placing cameras throughout suspected Bigfoot habitat. There are stories of cameras being moved, repositioned to point at the sky or the ground. Cameras found smashed or missing entirely. Lens covers being closed or blocked with leaves and mud. If a Bigfoot had been aware of this camera for months, had been interfering with it somehow, why did it suddenly allow itself to be recorded? That was the question eating at the property owner. Did the Bigfoot make a mistake? Was it sending a message? Or was this some kind of test, the Bigfoot wanting to see how humans would react to clear evidence of its existence? The property owner said they felt like they were being watched every time they went onto that part of their land now. They described feeling eyes on them from the tree line, hearing sounds that didn't match any known animal, finding footprints that were too large to be human but too human-shaped to be bear. They asked Reddit users what they should do. Should they report it to wildlife authorities, contact a university, bring in Bigfoot researchers, or should they just take the camera down and pretend they never saw anything? The comment section was predictably chaotic. Skeptics demanded proof it wasn't computer-generated imagery or a person in a costume. Believers urged them to set up more cameras, get better angles, capture more footage. Paranoid types warned them that government agencies monitor Bigfoot sightings and might show up to confiscate evidence. Jokes and memes mixed with serious attempts at analysis. Within 48 hours, the post had accumulated over 1,500 comments and had been shared across multiple social media platforms. News websites were starting to pick it up. Local Michigan news stations were trying to track down the property owner for interviews. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the account was deleted. The post vanished. The username showed as unavailable. All the follow-up questions people were asking went unanswered. It was like the property owner had second thoughts about going public and tried to erase their digital footprint. But internet archives never forget. The video had already been downloaded and reposted dozens of times. Screenshots of the original post circulated. Attempts to identify the location based on vegetation and terrain features led nowhere. Michigan has too much forest that looks identical. Without GPS coordinates or distinctive landmarks, pinpointing the exact property was impossible. The property owner had been smart enough to scrub all identifying information before posting, probably knowing how internet sleuthing works these days. I've thought a lot about why someone would share evidence this significant and then immediately delete everything. The most benign explanation is they got overwhelmed by attention and decided privacy was more important than being known as the person who filmed a Bigfoot. Less benign possibilities involve them receiving threats or pressure to take it down. Maybe from people who don't want Bigfoot proven real for various reasons. Maybe from property neighbors who don't want hordes of Bigfoot hunters trespassing through the area. Or maybe something happened on their property after posting that footage, something that made them realize sharing evidence of Bigfoot was a terrible mistake. Let's talk about what clear Bigfoot footage would actually mean if verified as authentic. We're not just talking about a cool nature documentary moment, we're talking about confirmation that a large, intelligent primate species exists in North America, has existed here for potentially thousands of years, and has managed to avoid scientific classification despite extensive human activity across the continent. That's not just zoologically significant, it's philosophically and culturally earth-shaking. Think about the implications. A breeding population of Bigfoot large enough to sustain itself across multiple states would require hundreds or thousands of individual animals. These animals would need to eat, would leave scat and hair samples, would have territories they defend and travel routes they use regularly. The fact that we don't have definitive physical evidence despite modern technology suggests these creatures have behavioral adaptations specifically evolved to avoid detection by humans. That level of avoidance behavior indicates intelligence on par with or exceeding great apes, possibly approaching human-level cognitive abilities in specific domains. Now consider the practical consequences if Bigfoot were officially acknowledged by scientific institutions and government agencies. Every forested national park, every wilderness area, every tract of timber company land would need to be reassessed for Bigfoot habitat. Environmental impact studies would need to account for an apex predator we currently pretend doesn't exist. Logging operations, mining operations, development projects, all of that would face new levels of scrutiny and regulation. The economic implications alone would be staggering. Then there's the question of how to manage human Bigfoot interactions. Right now, if someone claims they had a negative encounter with a Bigfoot, there's no official response protocol because officially Bigfoot doesn't exist. But if Bigfoot were acknowledged as real, suddenly you need wildlife management policies. Do we treat Bigfoot like bears and establish protocols for scared animals? Do we recognize them as potentially sapient beings deserving special protections? What happens when a Bigfoot raids someone's property or threatens livestock? What legal framework even applies to an undocumented species that might be more person than animal? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're urgent practical issues that would need immediate attention if clear, verified Bigfoot footage were presented to authorities. And that might be exactly why clear footage like this gets dismissed or ignored. It's not necessarily a conspiracy in the sense of shadowy government agents hiding evidence. It's more like systemic institutional inertia. combined with a complete lack of framework for how to handle something this disruptive to existing paradigms. Everyone involved would rather just continue the status quo of polite denial than open Pandora's box. I think about the property owner who posted this footage and then disappeared from Reddit. They asked what they should do with the evidence, and the answer they probably came to is nothing. There's no upside to pushing it further. They won't get taken seriously by scientists. They'll get harassed by skeptics and believers alike. Their property will be overrun with people trying to find the Bigfoot themselves. Local authorities will dismiss their concerns. Media attention will be a brief circus that moves on to the next story. And meanwhile, they still have to live on that land with the knowledge that something large and potentially dangerous is wandering through their forest, watching them from the shadows. So they deleted the post, removed the camera, and went back to pretending everything is normal. Because what else can you do when you have evidence of something impossible? But society has collectively decided that evidence doesn't matter. You protect yourself and your peace of mind, and you let the Bigfoot keep its secrets. Maybe that's the arrangement we've all tacitly agreed to. Bigfoot stays hidden, we stay skeptical, and nobody has to deal with uncomfortable truths about what's really out there in the wilderness. Let me break down the technical aspects of this footage in more detail because the quality and clarity really set it apart from most Bigfoot videos. Modern trail cameras have come a long way from the grainy, motion-triggered devices of 20 years ago. This particular camera appears to be a newer model, probably something in the mid-range price bracket based on the video quality. Resolution looks to be at least 1080p, possibly higher. The frame rate is smooth enough that the Bigfoot's movement doesn't appear jerky or stuttered. These technical factors matter because they eliminate some of the usual excuses skeptics use to dismiss footage. The timestamp overlay in the corner is a standard feature on trail cameras, and it's notoriously difficult to fake convincingly if you're trying to create hoax footage from scratch. The font, the positioning, the way it integrates with the image, all of that matches legitimate trail camera output. You could theoretically overlay a fake timestamp on hoaxed footage, but it would require attention to detail that most hoaxers don't bother with. The date reading May 18, 2025 puts this during late spring in Michigan, which explains the lush green vegetation filling the frame. Everything about the seasonal timing checks out. Lighting analysis is crucial for determining authenticity. The sun appears to be high in the sky, but filtered through dense tree canopy, creating that characteristic dappled lighting pattern you get in thick forest. You can see multiple light sources in the scene, all consistent with natural sunlight breaking through leaves at different angles. That's incredibly hard to fake convincingly with artificial lighting. The shadows fall correctly based on the light sources. The way light hits the Bigfoot's fur, creating highlights and shadows that reveal the texture and form, matches what you'd expect from an actual creature standing in that specific lighting environment. I've examined the edges of the Bigfoot's silhouette frame by frame, looking for the telltale signs of digital compositing. When you paste a CGI or photographed element into real footage, there's usually a slight halo effect or unnatural edge where the fake element meets the real background. I can't find that here. The Bigfoot's outline integrates seamlessly with the surrounding vegetation. When leaves and branches pass between the camera and the Bigfoot, the depth interaction looks correct. This is important because proper depth interaction is one of the hardest things to fake, convincingly even with professional-grade visual effects software. The motion blur is another telling detail. When the Bigfoot begins to move, you can see natural motion blur on the parts of its body that are moving faster, primarily the arms and upper torso as it turns. The blur looks organic, matching what a camera with this particular shutter speed would capture when photographing actual movement. Faked motion blur often looks too uniform or doesn't match the movement speed correctly. Here, the blur intensity varies appropriately with the speed of different body parts. The head moving slower shows less blur than the arm swinging. That's biomechanically correct. Focus is consistent throughout the clip. The camera is locked on a fixed focal distance with the foreground vegetation blurred and the middle distance where the Bigfoot stands in relatively sharp focus. This is exactly how trail cameras function. They're set to optimize focus at the distance where animals are most likely to pass through the field of view. The Bigfoot falls right in that sweet spot, suggesting it was indeed following a game trail at the expected distance from the camera. If someone had artificially inserted a Bigfoot into this footage, matching the focal depth correctly would require sophisticated post-production work. Color grading looks natural too. Trail cameras typically have slightly cooler color temperatures than professional cameras, and they handle highlights and shadows with a specific digital noise pattern. This footage shows exactly the color characteristics and noise patterns you'd expect from an actual trail camera. The Bigfoot's fur appears to be dark brown or black, but you can see variations in tone where light hits it differently. Real fur has this quality because individual hairs catch and reflect light differently. Fake fur, or CGI fur, often looks too uniform unless considerable effort goes into texturing it properly. The audio is another element worth mentioning. Trail cameras record audio, though it's often not great quality. I've heard descriptions of the audio from people who saw the original post before it was deleted. They mention ambient forest sounds, bird calls, wind rustling through leaves, and when the Bigfoot moves, there's the sound of heavy footfalls on leaf litter and the crack of a branch breaking underfoot. These audio details are easy to overlook, but hard to fake convincingly. Getting all the various forest sounds layered correctly with appropriate volume and directionality requires either actual field recording or extensive sound design work. Compression artifacts provide interesting clues too. When video gets uploaded to Reddit and then downloaded and re-uploaded to other platforms, it goes through multiple compression cycles. Each compression introduces artifacts, little glitches, and distortions in the image. These artifacts should be consistent across the entire frame if the footage is authentic. If someone inserted a fake element, that element would often have a different compression artifact pattern than the background. Forensic analysis of compression artifacts can reveal digital manipulation. From what I can see, the compression pattern is consistent throughout the frame, suggesting this is unedited footage straight from a trail camera. Michigan's ecology provides an interesting context for Bigfoot sightings. The state contains over 20 million acres of forest, mostly concentrated in the northern portions. That's an enormous amount of wilderness, much of it roadless and rarely visited by humans. The forests are predominantly mixed deciduous and coniferous, with oak, maple, pine, and hemlock creating dense canopy cover. Understory vegetation includes thick patches of ferns, mountain laurel, and various shrubs that create excellent concealment for large animals. Food sources are abundant. White-tailed deer populations throughout Michigan number in the hundreds of thousands, providing potential prey for a large predator. Black bears thrive in these forests, demonstrating that the ecosystem can support large omnivores. Acorns, berries, wild tubers, mushrooms, fish from thousands of inland lakes and streams. All of this creates a diverse food web that could theoretically sustain a population of large primates. Bigfoot wouldn't need to be exclusively predatory. Like other great apes, they could be primarily herbivorous with opportunistic meat consumption. Water is everywhere in Michigan. The state is practically defined by water, surrounded by Great Lakes, and containing over 11,000 inland lakes, plus countless streams and rivers. Any large animal needs reliable water access, and Michigan provides that in abundance. The combination of water, food, shelter, and minimal human presence in remote areas creates ideal habitat conditions. If Bigfoot populations exist, Michigan would rank among the top states for supporting them based purely on habitat suitability. Climate is another factor. Michigan experiences distinct seasons with cold winters that would require behavioral adaptations from any resident large mammal. Black bears hibernate or dramatically reduce activity during winter months. How would Bigfoot handle winter? Some reports suggest Bigfoot populations migrate seasonally, moving to different elevations or latitudes to follow more moderate weather and available food sources. Others suggest they might have winter denning behavior similar to bears. The fact that most Bigfoot sightings occur in warmer months could simply reflect human activity patterns, but it might also indicate the creatures are less active or more reclusive during winter. Population density estimates for Bigfoot are pure speculation, but we can make educated guesses based on comparable large mammals. Black bears in Michigan number somewhere around 12,000 individuals across the state's forests. That's a density of roughly 1 bear per 3 square miles in optimal habitat. Bigfoot would presumably exist at much lower densities since they're reportedly larger, require more food per individual, and seem to have lower reproductive rates based on the extreme rarity of juvenile sightings. If we assume Bigfoot populations exist at 1/10 the density of black bears, we'd be talking about maybe 1,000 individuals scattered across Michigan's forests. That sounds like a lot, but spread across 20 million acres of forest, you're looking at roughly 1 Bigfoot per 30 square miles. That kind of density would make encounters extremely rare, even for people who spend significant time in the woods. 1,000 individuals would also be enough to maintain genetic diversity and population viability over multiple generations, assuming Bigfoot reproduce at rates similar to other great apes. 1 offspring every few years per breeding female would be sufficient to maintain population stability at these low densities. Territory size for individual Bigfoot or family groups is another unknown. If they're similar to gorillas, you might have small family groups controlling territories of several square miles. If they're more solitary like orangutans, individuals might range across much larger areas. Either way, the vast scale of Michigan's forests could easily accommodate a small population without requiring frequent human contact. The property where this footage was captured could be within 1 Bigfoot's territory or at the intersection of multiple territories. The creature might regularly pass that specific spot, which would explain why it seemed unsurprised by the camera's presence. This Michigan footage isn't happening in isolation. Bigfoot encounters occur regularly across North America, reported by people who have nothing to gain from lying. Let me tell you about something that happened in Oregon a few years back that illustrates just how elusive and intelligent these creatures are, and why getting any footage at all is remarkable. There's a woman who lives alone in a cabin on several acres of forested land near the Cascade Range. She chose that location specifically for privacy and solitude after retiring from a stressful career. For months, she kept finding odd things around her property. Stacks of rocks arranged in cairns where she knew she hadn't built any, broken branches woven into crude structures that looked almost like shelters or markers, deer carcasses arranged in specific patterns, stripped clean of meat, but with bones left in neat piles. She assumed kids were messing with her at first, maybe teenagers playing pranks or trying to scare the hermit lady who lived in the woods. She set up a basic trail camera system around her property perimeter, 4 cameras covering the main approaches to her cabin. Every morning she'd check the footage: deer, elk, black bears, coyotes, all the normal Pacific Northwest wildlife. Never any humans, never any explanation for the mysterious structures and arrangements she kept finding. One night she heard something outside her cabin around 2 in the morning. Heavy footsteps on the wooden deck, the kind of weight that makes boards creak. She grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, thinking it must be a bear trying to get into her trash. When she turned on the porch light and looked through the window, she saw something massive standing at the edge of the deck, just beyond the light's reach. Too tall to be a bear, standing fully upright on two legs. It was looking at her through the window. They made eye contact for maybe 5 seconds. The Bigfoot didn't move, didn't react to the light, just stood there watching her. Then it turned and walked away into the trees with that same calm, unhurried gait you see in the Michigan footage. She described feeling no sense of threat from the encounter, just overwhelming strangeness, like the Bigfoot was curious about her the same way she was curious about it. Two intelligent beings sharing a moment of mutual acknowledgement before going their separate ways. The next morning, she checked all 4 trail cameras. Nothing. Not a single frame showing the Bigfoot approaching the cabin, standing on the deck, or leaving afterward. Hours of footage from multiple angles completely failed to capture something she had seen with her own eyes from less than 20 feet away. That's when she realized the cameras weren't malfunctioning. The Bigfoot knew where they were positioned and deliberately moved through the camera's blind spots. It had been doing that for months, creating those structures and arrangements while avoiding being photographed. She told me this story personally when I was researching Bigfoot encounters in the Pacific Northwest. She didn't want her name used, didn't want her property identified. She just wanted someone to know that these creatures aren't simply evading cameras by luck or low population numbers. They're actively aware of surveillance technology and take deliberate steps to avoid documentation. The only time cameras catch them is when they choose to allow it or when they make mistakes, which happens rarely because they've been avoiding humans successfully for generations. That's what makes the Michigan footage so extraordinary. Either that Bigfoot made an uncharacteristic error by not noticing the trail camera, or it decided for whatever reason that being filmed was acceptable in that moment. Neither possibility is comforting. If it's an error, it suggests these creatures are possibly becoming less cautious as their habitat shrinks and human encroachment increases. If it's deliberate, it means Bigfoot are comfortable enough with human technology now to manipulate it for their own purposes, whatever those might be. What we call Bigfoot isn't new. Indigenous peoples throughout North America have stories about large, hairy, human-like creatures living in forests and mountains. The Lummi Nation calls them Tsemekwes. The Spokane call them Shpawuk. The Salish use the name Sasquatch, which is where that term originated. Cherokee traditions speak of Tsul'kalu, a giant with superhuman strength. Nearly every tribal nation has some version of these stories passed down through countless generations long before European contact. These aren't monster stories in the way Europeans told tales of dragons or werewolves. Indigenous accounts of forest giants treat them as real beings, part of the natural order, deserving of respect and caution like any other large predator. The stories emphasize that these creatures are intelligent, avoid human contact when possible, and should not be pursued or antagonized. Many traditional teachings include protocols for what to do if you encounter one. Don't look directly at it, don't run, make yourself small and non-threatening, back away slowly. When European settlers arrived and began documenting these stories, they were often dismissed as mythology or misidentification of known animals. But the consistency across hundreds of tribal nations, across thousands of miles of different terrain and ecosystems suggests something more than cultural mythology. These stories describe the same basic creature, large, bipedal, covered in hair, human-like intelligence, forest-dwelling, predominantly nocturnal. That's a pretty specific set of characteristics to emerge independently across dozens of unconnected cultures. Modern Bigfoot encounters follow the same patterns described in traditional indigenous accounts. The creature's behavior, its habitat preferences, even the sense of intelligence and awareness people report when they see one, all align with stories that are hundreds or thousands of years old. Either we're dealing with the most persistent, widespread, culturally consistent myth in human history, or indigenous peoples have been accurately describing real encounters with an undocumented primate species all along. There's a particular story from the Pacific Northwest that's always stuck with me. An elder from the Coast Salish people explained that Sasquatch were considered people, just not human people. They had their own language, their own society, their own territories. The protocol was to treat encounters with Sasquatch the same way you treat encounters with neighboring tribes, respectfully, carefully, with clear communication of intentions. You didn't enter Sasquatch territory without a good reason, and if you did, you made offerings and announced yourself properly. That framing changes how you think about the Michigan footage. This isn't wildlife photography. This is a first contact moment between two intelligent species that have been sharing the continent for millennia but keeping careful distance from each other. The Bigfoot looking into that camera isn't an animal caught in a candid moment. It's a person deciding whether to acknowledge being seen or to maintain the boundary that's kept its species hidden from ours. And it chose acknowledgement, which raises the question, why now? Some indigenous knowledge keepers say that Sasquatch only reveal themselves when they want to deliver a message or when circumstances force interaction. Maybe habitat loss has reached the point where Bigfoot can no longer avoid humans as completely as they once did. Maybe they're testing human reactions to see if we've evolved past the shoot-first mentality that's historically defined our response to large predators. Or maybe individual Bigfoot are making their own choices about isolation versus contact, the same way individual humans decide whether to live in cities or deep wilderness. The folklore also warns about what happens when humans become too interested in Bigfoot. Multiple traditions include accounts of people who went searching for forest giants and never returned, or returned changed in some way that made them unreliable members of their communities. The implication is that Bigfoot might tolerate being seen occasionally, but actively pursuing them crosses a line that brings consequences. That might explain why researchers who dedicate their lives to finding Bigfoot rarely succeed, while casual hikers occasionally stumble into encounters. The creatures can tell when they're being hunted versus randomly encountered. Looking at the Michigan footage through this folkloric lens, the Bigfoot's calm demeanor makes more sense. It's not surprised by the camera because it's encountered cameras before. It's not afraid of being filmed because it understands that humans don't take this evidence seriously anyway. The social contract that's kept Bigfoot hidden isn't being maintained by the creatures hiding perfectly. It's being maintained by humans refusing to accept evidence even when it's presented clearly. As long as we keep dismissing every photo and video as fake, Bigfoot can walk right up to cameras and stare into them without consequences. So here's the question. Everyone asks when they see footage like this, why aren't wildlife agencies investigating? Why aren't universities sending research teams? Why isn't this being treated as the zoological discovery of the century? The answers are more complicated and disappointing than any conspiracy theory. First, understand that wildlife management agencies operate on limited budgets with clear mandates to manage known documented species. Bigfoot isn't on any official species list, so there's no budget allocation for studying it, no legal framework for managing it, no career advancement for researchers who pursue it. A state wildlife biologist who spends time investigating Bigfoot reports isn't doing their actual job, which is managing deer populations and black bears and threatened species that everyone agrees exist. Their supervisor won't approve it, their budget won't cover it, and their professional reputation will suffer for taking it seriously. Universities face similar constraints. Academic research requires funding, and funding agencies won't support cryptozoology projects because peer review committees consider Bigfoot pseudoscience. A graduate student who proposes a Bigfoot research project won't get their dissertation approved. A professor who diverts grant money toward investigating unknown primates will face ethics complaints and probably lose tenure. The entire academic structure is designed to prevent exactly this kind of speculative research, even when evidence might warrant investigation. Then there's the reputation issue. Wildlife biology and zoology are competitive fields. Researchers build careers on credibility and peer-reviewed publications. Being associated with Bigfoot research, even as a skeptical investigator, carries professional stigma that can damage or destroy a career. You become the joke at conferences, the cautionary tale about what happens when scientists go off the deep end. Most researchers with legitimate interest in investigating Bigfoot sightings do so quietly, unofficially, knowing they can never publish findings or discuss it openly. Some people think federal agencies like the FBI or Department of Interior are actively suppressing Bigfoot evidence. I've looked into those claims extensively. What I found is more banal than a cover-up. These agencies receive Bigfoot reports occasionally, file them under miscellaneous wildlife sightings, and don't investigate because they don't have the resources or mandate to investigate unverified species. There's no active suppression, there's just bureaucratic indifference combined with lack of protocol for handling reports about animals that officially don't exist. The few government documents about Bigfoot that exist through Freedom of Information Act requests are mostly amusing inter-office memos about how to politely respond to public inquiries. One FBI memo from the 1970s shows they did analyze some hair samples allegedly from Bigfoot, determined they weren't from any known animal but probably were from a synthetic costume, and basically said, "This isn't our job. Contact a university." That's about as deep as government involvement goes. Not a conspiracy, just agencies staying in their lanes and declining to investigate things outside their purview. What would it take for authorities to actually investigate Bigfoot seriously? Probably a body. A specimen that could be collected, examined, DNA tested, officially classified. Short of that, even the clearest footage in the world will be dismissed because video can be faked, and proving a video's authenticity is nearly impossible with modern CGI capabilities. You'd need not just clear footage, but multiple pieces of corroborating physical evidence from the same location. Hair samples with unusual DNA, footprint casts with dermal ridges, scat samples with unknown gut bacteria profiles, damage patterns to vegetation suggesting large bipedal movement. Even then, I'm not sure it would be enough. The scientific establishment has invested over a century into maintaining that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Admitting error at this point would be professionally and institutionally humiliating for a lot of people. There's tremendous institutional inertia keeping the status quo in place, not because anyone is malicious, but because changing course would be disruptive and embarrassing. So footage like what came out of Michigan gets noted, filed away, and forgotten. Another ambiguous piece of evidence that changes nothing. The property owner who posted that footage asked what they should do with it. The honest answer is probably nothing. Sending it to wildlife agencies will get a polite non-response. Sending it to universities will get ignored or dismissed. Going to media will generate a brief burst of attention and then nothing. The only people who will take it seriously are the ones who already believe Bigfoot exists, and they're not in positions to conduct official investigations or implement policy changes. So the footage just joins thousands of other pieces of evidence that sit in digital archives, accumulating but never quite reaching the critical mass needed to force acknowledgement. I've laid out everything I know about the Michigan footage. I've described what you see in those 10 seconds, shared the context from the property owner's post before they deleted everything, explained why this matters beyond just a cool video, and covered why authorities won't investigate no matter how clear the evidence gets. Now, I want to hear what you think, because this is genuinely one of those topics where reasonable people can look at the same evidence and reach completely different conclusions. When you watch this footage, what's your gut reaction? Does it look real to you? Can you see details that suggest fakery that I missed? Does the Bigfoot's behavior seem consistent with a living creature, or does something feel staged? I'm genuinely curious because I've watched it so many times I've lost objectivity. Every time I think I've spotted something that proves it's a person in a costume, I watch again and my certainty evaporates. The proportions seem wrong for a human. The movement is too fluid. The way light hits the fur looks too organic. But maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see. There's the question of why someone would hoax this. The property owner didn't monetize the video, didn't seek fame, didn't sell the story to tabloids. They posted it on Reddit asking for advice and then disappeared when attention got overwhelming. That's not typical hoaxer behavior. Hoaxers want attention, want to profit from their creation, want to laugh at people arguing over whether it's real. This person seemed genuinely concerned and then retreated. That pattern fits someone who accidentally captured something they didn't know how to handle better than someone trying to perpetrate a hoax. But absence of obvious motive for hoaxing doesn't prove authenticity. Maybe the person is a genuinely talented special effects artist who created this as an experiment in viral content. Maybe they work in film or game design and have the skills to create convincing CGI or practical effects. Maybe they did it as social commentary on how easily misinformation spreads online, or as an art project exploring folklore and belief. Without knowing who posted it or what their background is, we can't rule out sophisticated hoaxing, even if simple hoaxing seems unlikely. Then there's the broader question. Does it matter if this specific footage is real? Because even if you're convinced this particular video is fake, the phenomenon it represents isn't fake. Thousands of people report Bigfoot encounters every year. Most don't seek publicity, don't fabricate physical evidence, just quietly report what they saw to databases or researchers and move on with their lives. Those reports cluster in specific geographic regions with consistent habitat types. The descriptions are remarkably similar across different time periods and locations. All of that suggests something real is being encountered, even if any particular piece of photo or video evidence might be questionable. I think about the property owner checking their trail cameras and finding this footage between mundane photos of deer and raccoons. I think about those moments of decision. Do I keep this private? Do I share it? If I share it, how? What happens to my life if this goes viral? What happens to my property if people come looking for the Bigfoot? They chose to share it briefly before deciding the consequences weren't worth it. But that decision to share, even temporarily, suggests they believed they'd captured something significant and wanted input on what it meant. Ultimately, I can't tell you definitively whether this footage shows a real Bigfoot or an elaborate fake. What I can tell you is it's the clearest trail camera footage allegedly showing Bigfoot that I've ever analyzed. It doesn't have the obvious problems that make most Bigfoot videos easy to dismiss. The subject is in frame long enough to examine details. The lighting is good enough to see texture and form. The movement looks natural. The context from the property owner makes sense. And the fact that it disappeared so quickly from its original source suggests someone got scared enough to erase it, which is interesting in itself. If you're someone who's been on the fence about whether Bigfoot might exist, this footage should make you pause. If you're a complete skeptic who's certain all Bigfoot evidence is fake, this should at least make you acknowledge that some fakes are incredibly well done if that's what this is. And if you're already a believer, this is probably the best evidence you've seen in years, if not ever. We're at an interesting moment where technology has advanced enough to capture very clear images, but has also advanced enough to fake very clear images. And the gap between authentic and fabricated is narrower than ever. I want to know what you think after seeing this and reading the full story behind it. Drop your analysis in the comments. Tell me if you think it's real and why, or if you think it's fake and how you think it was done. Tell me if you've had your own encounter with something you couldn't explain while out in the woods. Tell me if you think authorities should take Bigfoot seriously as a potential undocumented species, or if you think the whole phenomenon is mass delusion and misidentification. I'm genuinely curious about different perspectives because I genuinely don't know what to believe anymore. What I do know is this: that Michigan property owner saw something on their trail camera that scared them enough to ask strangers on the internet for advice. They saw something that made them delete their post and retreat when attention got too intense. They saw something that's now out there in the digital wilderness, copied and archived beyond their control, being analyzed by thousands of people trying to determine if we just got the first clear look at a species science says doesn't exist. And somewhere in a Michigan forest, a Bigfoot is still out there, aware it was filmed, probably aware the footage is circulating online, just continuing its life in the shadows like it's done for centuries. That last image from the trail camera where you can just barely see movement through the foliage as the Bigfoot steps away feels symbolic somehow. We get these brief glimpses, these moments where the veil between hidden and known grows thin, and then the mystery retreats back into deeper forest. Maybe that's all we'll ever get. Maybe that's all Bigfoot will ever allow us to have. Brief, ambiguous evidence that changes nothing but keeps the question alive. And maybe that's exactly how both species prefer it. So that's the story behind what might be the clearest Bigfoot footage from 2026, even though it was recorded in 2025. The story that will terrify you isn't the creature itself, though seeing that face look into the camera is unnerving enough. The terrifying part is how easily significant evidence gets buried, dismissed, and forgotten. How someone can capture clear footage of something extraordinary and then be forced to erase it because our systems aren't equipped to handle proof that challenges existing paradigms. The real horror isn't Bigfoot, it's the institutional blindness that keeps us from seeing what's right in front of us. Think about that next time you're walking through deep forest and feel eyes on you from the tree line. Think about what might be watching you, evaluating you, deciding whether to remain hidden or step into view. And think about what you'd do if you actually got clear footage. Would you share it? Would you delete it? Would you be brave enough to face the consequences of proof? Or would you do what that property owner did? Briefly show the world what you found, then retreat when you realize the world isn't ready for answers to questions it's been asking for centuries? I'll leave you with that. Watch the footage if you can find it in archives or repost sites. Study those 10 seconds carefully. Look at the Bigfoot's face as it stares into the camera. Look at how it moves through dense vegetation with practiced ease. Look at how calm and unhurried it is, like being filmed is just a minor inconvenience rather than a threat. And then decide for yourself, is this the clearest evidence we've ever had of Bigfoot's existence? Or is this the most sophisticated hoax yet created? Either way, the story behind it should make you question what else might be out there in the wilderness, watching us from just beyond our ability to see clearly. Because whether Bigfoot is real or not, whether this footage is authentic or fabricated, one thing is certain. There's still mystery in this world. There are still places cameras don't reach, questions science can't answer, beings that might walk through our forests just outside our perception. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need every mystery solved. Maybe some things are better left in that liminal space between known and unknown, keeping us humble about how much we really understand about the planet we share. What do you think? Real or fake? Let me know in the comments. For more interesting stories, check this out.